Okay, Chair, when you're ready, we're now streaming live on YouTube. Thank you. Ready to go, Chair, when you are? Can you hear me, Chair?
Yeah.
Ready to go when you are?
Great. Good evening and welcome to East Devon District Council's virtual LED monitoring forum on the 30th of March 2021. I would also like to welcome anyone watching this meeting via the live streaming. All participants here today are taking part remotely, and as well as being live streamed, the meeting is being recorded, so please bear this in mind throughout. May I remind you to be careful with your language. May I also remind members that the code of conduct applies throughout the meeting. We also have the right to remove and disconnect any participants disrupting the meeting by whatever means necessary. As this meeting is dependent on internet connection, in the event of a break in connection or a power cut, please bear with us as we try to reconnect. After 15 minutes, if we are not able to reconnect, we will consider the meeting adjourned and reconvene at a later date. Please check the committee page on our website for details. Please make sure all phones are turned off or on silent, and make sure all microphones are muted when you are not speaking to avoid any background noise levels. Keep points short and do not repeat points that have already been made, and do not interrupt. If you wish to comment, please raise your electronic hand and wait to be called. We will now start the meeting by doing a roll call of committee members here present. Can you please now unmute your microphone? When you hear your name, confirm by saying present, and when you're confirmed you're present, please mute again.
Thank you, Chair. Can I start with Councillor Arnott, please?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Dent?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hartnell?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hayward? Don't see Councillor Hayward. Councillor Johns? No. Councillor Young?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Pook? No. Councillor Rowland?
Present. Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you. And it looks like Councillor Johns has just joined us. Can you confirm your presence, please?
Yeah, sorry, I was having an issue trying to get in, but I'm here now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. I can confirm that you are quorate.
Thank you, Debbie. Onto agenda item number 1, public speaking. There are no members of the public registered to speak. Agenda item 2 minutes of the previous meeting held on the 23rd of February 2021. If there are any members with any comment on the minutes, please raise your electronic hand. If there are no issues, I assume that you're all content that they are agreed. I can see no hands, so I will take that. Thank you. On to agenda item 3, apologies. Debbie, have we got any apologies?
Only from the Chief Executive, I have, Chair. Thank you. Does anyone else have any apologies?
No. Okay, thank you. Agenda item 4 is declarations of interest. This will be done by roll call. Debbie, back to you, please.
Thank you. Members, can I just remind you when I call out your name, please state your declaration, which includes which agenda item your declaration relates to, if it's personal or prejudicial, and what exactly the interest is. So, Councillor Arnott first, please.
Thank you. A general personal interest that I am a member of LED. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dent, please.
The same. Personal interest, member of LED. In the past, in the minutes, it said paid up, but since nobody's taking my subscription, I can hardly claim to be paid up, but I do believe I am a member still.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hartnell, please.
None, thanks, Debbie.
Thank you. Councillor Hawkins.
None, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johns.
None for me, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
Yep, I'm not a member, but most of my family are. So it's a personal interest.
Okay. Thank you. And Councillor Rowland, please.
None. Thanks, Debbie.
That's great. Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. On to agenda item 5, matters of urgency. There is one late report listed under agenda item 10. Agenda item 6 is confidential and exempt items. There is one item which members recommend should be dealt with in this way, also listed under item 10. Agenda item 7, management agreement review of Colleton Grammar School dual use site, and that's the service lead for place assets and commercialisation. To provide an update, please.
All right, thank you very much, Chair. We've talked in previous meetings about the opportunities to explore, restructuring the arrangements at the various shared use sites we have across the district. So we've spoken about the broad concept in previous meetings, and indeed there have been discussions on and off around this for a number of years. However, recently we've been approached by Colleton Grammar School regarding a proposal there that perhaps enables us to do just that. There's been an initial meeting with Peter Gilpin and I with representatives from the school in terms of just beginning to identify a possible way forward. We may or may not get to a position whereby we can agree something and I can put something to members. But at this stage, it's very much just an update to the forum on where we currently are, as I think it sort of sets out some interesting points that will probably be relevant across a number of different sites. It's a verbal update only. It's for information only as well. I have 9 bullet points in front of me, which I'm just quickly going to run through. So if you could bear with me, it sort of sets out the story and the background behind the arrangements at Colleton and how these might change. So if you just bear with me, I will be reading it, I'm afraid. So firstly, an opportunity exists to revise and improve the council's and LED's offering at Colleton and to ensure a fairer apportionment of costs. Now, the apportionment of costs is something that has been an issue for the last couple of years that we need to tackle, and this may be the ideal opportunity to do that, as well as providing a better offering. So just a brief background about the centre. So the centre's on the school site, but to reflect the council's contribution to its build costs, we have a 99-year lease to East Devon District Council, who are then responsible for the management and maintenance of the building. Through both the lease and a management agreement that sits beneath that, the school benefit from use of the building during the school day. Say for 2 hours per day, when the council, stroke LED, are permitted to use the dance studio, just being just one room within the leisure centre. The council and LED benefit from the building at all other times outside of school day. And the management agreement also allows the council and LED to use the synthetic pitch outside of the school day, with the pitch being the school's responsibility to maintain, but with the council and LED compensating them by paying the school a proportion of the income received. So just to summarise that, the leisure centres are responsibility to maintain, but we can recover a share of the costs. The synthetic pitch is outside of the lease, but is covered within the management agreement, and it's the school's responsibility to manage, but with a contribution from ourselves, which comes via a percentage of the income received from the artificial pitch. For the last 2 years, we've had interim arrangements with the school that we won't use the dance studio or indeed any part of the leisure centre during the school day. That was brought around really due to safeguarding concerns identified by the school, but also it's probably fair to say their expanded intake, so the greater need they had for the space. In exchange for us removing ourselves from the building for 2 hours per day, they compensate the council, who then compensate LED for the lost income, but also more particularly the increased operating costs, because LED, certainly prior to COVID, had to run the classes elsewhere and hire in space. However, we need to reach a permanent solution. That's been an interim arrangement renewed now for the 2nd year, but we need to sort that. So that's the background. Then the school have now approached approached Peter, I think, directly initially. Peter put the school in contact with myself, and Peter and I then had an initial meeting. That started off the meeting regarding the synthetic pitch. They need to invest quite heavily in the synthetic pitch, so that's their issue. But they're looking for a greater contribution than the agreement currently provides from ourselves towards the investment cost. And there are some quite significant advantages to the council and LED if we were to get sort of more use out of those artificial pitches. So Peter and I met with the school. We had an exploratory discussion about how we could perhaps, if they wanted a different arrangement on the synthetic pitches, how we could perhaps use it as an opportunity to ensure that the management agreement was brought up to date, more fit for purpose, and a more fairer, I'd suggest, allocation of costs. So we're looking at the school contributing more towards the costs of the leisure centre to reflect their increased usage, but the council and LED perhaps contributing more towards the synthetic pitch in exchange for a much enhanced community facility that, through better surfacing and lighting, would ensure much more community use outside of school hours, particularly weekday evenings, when obviously the lighting's absolutely key. And that will then generate additional revenue for ourselves and LED. The management agreement itself actually refers to the fact that we should periodically be reviewing it, refreshing it, and making changes to reflect current circumstances. And that's something that over the last probably 10 years almost has been allowed to lapse. So we now have a management agreement that doesn't really accurately reflect what happens within the site. So Peter and I had that initial discussion. The timing's really good in many ways, in that it also coincides with the work that Strategic Leisure are doing in terms of the diagnostic assessment and then the leisure strategy. So this allows us, through that work, to look at whether we want to make much better use of the artificial pitches. And certainly from the meeting, Peter was of the view that there is very much a demand and need for more and better use out of those pitches. So I suppose to sort of wrap this up, with the support of the forum today, officers will continue the dialogue with the school and report back with some recommendations, taking into account both the strategic, particularly what comes out through the leisure review, but also the operational financial values of the respective facilities attributed by Strategic Leisure and LED. And so yeah, there'll be a further report back to this forum if forum members indeed would like us to continue those discussions. And then once we have concluded those discussions, it may or may not then provide an opportunity to consider further dialogue regarding the other shared use sites. So apologies, it was a verbal update, because initially I thought it would be a very, very quick verbal update. As you can sense from going through this, it's slightly more detailed, but I don't think it was quite detailed enough for a report. So that hopefully brings you up to speed and where we envisage moving forward with this. But please be reassured that clearly any agreements that are reached will be subject to the usual decision making, and before it even gets to that stage, we'll come back to the forum. So happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Tim. I'll open up the floor then. So first of all, I've got Councillor Rowland, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Tim, for that update. Being fairly close to the area that I serve in Seaton, I am aware of the history over the last few years, so I welcome that these discussions are taking place, and let's hope that they are fruitful. I couldn't really tell from what you were saying, though, whether at the end of the day it's going to cost East Devon District Council more money. are you in a position to give any indication at all at the moment, or is that a totally unfair question in view of the discussions that are taking place?
Chair, if you'd like me to respond direct to that question. The outcome for the leisure centre must be that it costs us less money. We're using it less, and therefore it should be costing us less in terms of our in terms of contribution we get back from the school. In terms of the artificial pitches, ultimately there will be a much enhanced facility, is what the school is proposing. So we would, one way or another, the school would be looking for us to contribute more towards that. So that will cost us. But then in exchange for that, we will be able to achieve greater revenue outside of school hours. So I'm certainly not going into this discussion on the basis that I'm going to come back out to the forum to say, look, I've had a negotiation with school and I've got a proposal for you whereby we pay more. So I think that probably answers your question. But how we structure it may be different. So rather than perhaps paying the percentage of income to the school, it could be we look at actually making a capital contribution to the school in exchange for then reducing our income. But I'm certainly not going into this negotiation on the basis it's going to cost you more after we conclude it.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you. Councillor Arnott, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Tim, for a really comprehensive verbal report. You know, when you read something in the newspapers that you know something about, and it's always completely wrong. Collerton Grammar School sports facilities is something I've been involved in one way or the other for about 20 years, and I'm really confident that Tim and Peter are right across this. Those are absolutely the issues. When permission was given to construct the new gym, there was a letter of comfort as part of the planning application, which helped make the decision in favour of it from the school, from the incredible former head teacher, promising us perpetual use, community use. Now, that was read by the community that would include daytime use as well. However, I can see that things have moved on in terms of school security and how obliged they are now to make properties, campuses secure from outside, and there we are. And I think that's the same at Ottery as well. There was a very strong local campaign 2 years ago when the idea from the school was to take the sprung floor dance studio and turn it into a weight training area for the kids. And this was regarded as incredible vandalism really being proposed, and they backed off on that. And I'm glad, and I believe that idea has gone for good, because that particular room is used for the most extraordinary range and diversity of different kinds of exercise, and the sprung floor is really important. The main gym in the evenings is used for everything from badminton to five-a-side to absolutely anything you can think of. It's a beautiful, it's a very airy, very clean building. It's kept very well. LED have run it very well in terms of bookings. It obviously aligns with what goes on at Axe Valley as well. You know, so similar. You can book through any of those things. I mean, I think it feels like these discussions are going in the right way, Chair. I'd say to Tim through you. I think as far as the pitch outside is concerned, again, I've coached, girls and boys soccer teams on there for years on and off. The soccer teams are coming up from Seaton as well, training there. I'm slightly surprised that there's thought to be any extra capacity for booking those pitches in the evenings, because it's quite full. It may not be very full at the weekends, there may be an opportunity there. Again, Chair, through you, I'd be interested to ask Tim whether, and indeed Peter probably may know this even better, if it's a 3G pitch that they're thinking of doing along the lines of at Axe Valley at the moment, in upgrading what they've got, presumably there are Sport England or other FA grants or whatever that we could apply for to help actually fund that. But yeah, finally, that's the only question: is perhaps is there that kind of money there? But other than that, this feels like a beginning of a very good discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Are you able to address the question about the pitch?
Peter, I'm sure would be much more able to than me. If I could pass over to him, please.
Yeah, if I may. And you're quite right, Councillor Arnott. Actually, it is a very well used pitch. But my concern is not so much about I think we can get more usage, but the problem with the pitch is, unlike the management agreement for the leisure centre, there's no specified hours tied in where the school must provide it. And there's sort of underlying messages that if they can't afford to repair the floodlights, for example, they won't. And then the usage in the evenings, particularly during the winter, ceases completely. So it's as much about income protection and usage protection as it is about, in fact, more so than in fact expanding the use. So if the school were to say, well, we're not repairing the floodlights, and they have sort of said that, implied it, then we lose all the evening use throughout the winter. And it's only like now the clocks have gone forward where we can play until about 7:30. So the floodlights are very important to get them repaired in particular, and then the surface. And then I think what Tim also mentioned was, well, in response to your question about is funding available, I think once Strategic Leisure have done their initial diagnostic assessment, and perhaps Liz, I might put you on the spot here, and I would hope that Colleton pitch does come out as a strategic asset, which is important, and identifies which sports it should be targeting, then we've got a case, because we've got a strategy which identifies its importance, what sports it should be supporting, and then you've got a case to go to the various sporting bodies to get funding, as we did with Ottery St Mary, which was identified, for example, as a hockey pitch. So we got quite a lot, 100, 200,000, I think, from the Hockey Association. So once we've had the strategy and the diagnostic assessment, I think that will support the case and reinforce which sports we should be asking the school to provide for.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Johns next, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I've only got a couple of questions. I agree with what Councillor Arnott said earlier with reference to the fact that when these provisions were first made, or first pitched, should I say, I was actually at King School when LED was built there. And it was supposedly going to be open for all the community at all times. Obviously, with the way that things have gone, I've had children that have gone through King, so I fully understand safeguarding issues, etc. So I understand the same principle at Colleton. My questions are, how long is the agreement between LED and Colleton Grammar School going to be for, with reference to, the usage of the pitch, the synthetic pitch, and the school and the hall itself? And the other question is, obviously, Colleton Grammar School is open, I believe, from 8:45 till 3:30 term time, but they obviously do extracurricular activities as well. So would Colleton Grammar School then get preferential treatment if they decided to use, obviously, the sports centre for extracurricular activities? Do they get to use it then as well, over and above, members of the community, etc.? So those would be my questions, please.
Shall I pick that up, Tim? Yeah, so I think what we're looking at, and Tim alluded to this as well about all dual use schools, is effectively school use from 9 in the morning until 5 or 5:30 in the evening, because it does reflect the extracurricular activities. So we don't get into the sports halls and some of the school facilities until after school, about 5 o'clock. And that's across the board as well, all the dual use sites, unless we've got access to gyms or things which are specific in the management agreements. So so hopefully that sort of answers the question. There was something else. I'll come back to it when I remember.
Okay, sorry, if I may, Chair, my other question was, how long would the agreement between LED and Colleton be with regards to the synthetic pitch? If we're paying for, redoing the synthetic pitch and putting floodlights, etc. in, it was only for a couple of years.
Yeah, that was the point I couldn't remember. Sorry, Councillor Johns. Yeah, but my expectation, and I'm sure Tim's would be as well, that if you are putting a capital investment into the floodlights and the pitch, that we get that locked in. So usually that sort of investment for those sort of pitches would be a 15-year refurbishment program. Again, Liz from Strategic Leisure might confirm that, but most synthetic pitches are factored into a 10 to 15-year life cycle. Certainly the one we did at Axminster with the Football Association funding, it was a 15-year agreement with a sinking fund included. So my expectation would be if the council put capital investment in, we'd be locking them into providing that facility for at least the 15 years, probably, if we could, Tim, locking it into the period of the remaining agreement to make sure it is ensconced in the agreement, because it's a bit woolly, the agreement for the pitch, unlike the leisure centre.
So just to sort of add to what Peter has said, so in terms of the leisure centre itself, it's how long are we tied in, or how long do we have the benefit for? Well, it's the remainder of the 99-year lease, and I don't have the exact figure, but we're 10, 15 maybe years through that, so we've got good 80 something years left of that. So and I suppose where the risk has always been is that the lease relates to the building, the management agreement relates, which is reviewed, and that the agreement itself encourages that it is reviewed periodically, is of the building and also the artificial pitch. And there's a risk really there, because the two do go together and there are big synergies. So yeah, we'd be looking to get sort of within reason, as long as sort of an agreement is possible on the pitch. But ultimately, in terms of what our trade can be, it depends on ultimately what that split of sort of responsibility for costs are really. So that will come out in the wash.
Chair, if I could just add, in terms of the lifespan of an artificial pitch, it's normally around between 10 and 15 years. But that is entirely dependent on the level of usage of the surface. In terms of capital cost for the surface itself, we're looking at anything from about 220,000 approximately, depending on whether you put a shock pad underneath the surface as well. So normally you sort of gauge around about 10-year lifespan, which you would review a couple of years beforehand to see whether that needs bringing forward or extending.
Thank you. Tim, are you looking for an explicit recommendation from the forum to continue the talks, or is it just an update at this time?
I suppose I'm looking for support of the forum to continue the dialogue. The forum may well, of course, tell me, no, you've had this, don't go any further with it. So it's just support from the forum to proceed in these discussions, to then at some future date come back with some detail.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Young, please.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, this is not about sport, but about money. But how much, in a normal year, how much profit does this facility contribute to LED?
Happy for anyone.
If I were to answer that, I would say not a lot. This is a community facility. I think you can differentiate between some of our facilities, which are main large town facilities and very well used, such as Exmouth Leisure Centre and Honiton Leisure Centre, which are in towns and produce a surplus. And those surpluses obviously go into our funds to subsidise the non-profitable sites, which are the smaller ones in rural areas such as Collerton, and then any shortfall of that funding is made up by yourselves, which is another agenda item later on. So if in a good year it might break even, but in past years it's required a subsidy. So it is there as a community facility really, rather than a commercial venture, and well used as such.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Rowland next, please.
Thanks, Chair. In view of what I've heard and all the answers to the question, can I actually move that the negotiations that Tim and Peter have started continue? So there is a formal record for the minutes.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder, please?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor Dent. On that basis, then, we've had the proposal for effectively Tim's team to carry on with their negotiations. If you'd like to use your ticks, crosses, or a hand for an abstention, please.
Okay, for the benefit of those watching online, the vote is now taking place. And I have 6 votes for, Chair, 1 abstention, no votes against. So that is carried. Thank you.
Thank you. On to agenda item 8, then, which is the East Devon District Council's playing pitch strategy. I've got that listed again for the service lead for place assets commercialisation to provide an update.
Hopefully it's not me.
No, I was thinking that as I was saying it.
I think that's Matt Dickens, probably. I'm hoping.
Yeah, Matt, on to you. Sorry.
Chair, have I made a mistake in your script, Chair?
You stick anything in front of me, I'll read it out.
Oh, sorry. Let's wheel out Matt, shall we?
Yeah, Matt, on to you, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm getting a terrible buzzing in my ear, but I'll carry on. I'm hoping that the playing pitch strategy report is pretty much self-explanatory, and I'm happy just to go to questions on that if that would help.
Excellent, nice, snappy and short. I like it. Any questions? Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome the new playing pitch strategy, but my question is relating to the fact that I've looked at the old playing pitch strategy, which was between 2015 and 2019, and from what I can see from that 2015 playing pitch strategy, there's very little that has been achieved in that time. And I speak as an Exmouth councillor. In fact, the situation has become worse in terms of playing pitches. We've lost playing pitches within that 2015 to 2019 period. So my question to the report writer, and it might not be his fault, is basically, what can we do to ensure that this strategy is actually seen through in terms of actions? Because it's all good and well having a strategy, but if it's not going to be implemented, well, there's no point writing it. And I think, from my perspective, reading the 2015 strategy, there's been lots and lots of promises about improving Exmouth's playing pitches. And when I was elected in 2019, I find myself in a position where no playing pitches have been restored at all. And since I've been elected, it's taken me a lot of time to lobby certain cabinet members to ensure that in my ward, Warren View, is brought back to, is invested in by the council. So my question to the officer, as I say, will be, brilliant strategy, but how can we make sure that these points in this strategy will be properly implemented? Thank you.
Thank you. Matt, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think that the answer is it's actually incredibly difficult to get things to happen on the ground. So in the case of Exmouth and Honiton, we did an awful lot, and it was a former colleague of mine who was really leading on this, an awful lot of trying to identify sites, for new facilities, trying to identify potential funding streams, trying to look at the potential for aligning pitch provision with other development opportunities. And I mean, it really is a big challenge, certainly on that delivery side. I mean, in both Exmouth and Honiton, you're compounded by lack of suitable land, the topography, environmental constraints are a major factor. But there are also funding problems, and the council has limited availability of monies. Other partners have limited availabilities of money. So it highlights a really big challenge in terms of new facility provision. There are obviously mechanisms you can use the strategy to support grant aiding and bids. There's monies that come through from 106 agreements that can go into some provision. So there are bits of angles, but to identify kind of substantial sums to do big things with, I think you raise an absolutely fundamental challenge. And I don't have a sort of a ready answer to that.
Thank you. Peter Gilpin, did you want to come in at that point? I see your hand's gone up.
Yeah, just a quick update. Councillor Miller, it's not quite true that there hasn't been any improvement. I mentioned earlier that certainly I can't speak for football pitches and grass pitches that we're not responsible for, but for the sites that we are responsible for, we've helped to facilitate significant grant investment, and we've got a new 3G pitch built at Axminster with Football Association funding. That was, and Floodlit, it's about a 400k project which has been delivered since the last play and pitch strategy. And at Ottery, as I think I mentioned, Ottery Leisure Centre, again, another £400,000 project, which again, we helped facilitate significant investment from the Hockey Association. That was completely resurfaced and new floodlights a couple of years ago. So certainly within the LED facilities, we've had one new pitch and one refurbished pitch. And there's another pitch been delivered over in Cranbrook as well, although the access to that is a little more limited. So just to flag up those two projects, certainly the LED helped to facilitate in the last 4 years.
Chair, through you, just to clarify, it's a point of explanation that it was very much about the performance in Exmouth, and I don't doubt that the playing pitch strategy has delivered elsewhere in the districts. I was very much making a point that the points of the last strategy have not been, have not succeeded in Exmouth, and that was the only point I was making. So just to be very clear that I was not trying to criticise Peter or anybody else in terms of their performance in the wider district. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Gazzard next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm not criticising Peter either. I find myself agreeing with what Councillor Miller has just said. The last strategy absolutely has failed in Exmouth. We thought we were going to get some extra football pitches, and it has been identified by Sports England that Exmouth is underutilised, has not enough football pitches, and we do have a real problem with football pitches in Exmouth. And I know Matt is going to be doing his very best, but there is some scepticism of whether, even with a new strategy, whether things will move forward in Exmouth. And we desperately do need more sports pitches in Exmouth. And as Councillor Miller said, the one at Warren View, that we all thought was going to come forward, and that was involved with the FA and I think it was the Exeter Academy. And we've got land up at St John playing field that used to be a rugby field, come football pitch. Yes, there are problems with it, but it could be adapted. We'd just like to see the strategy come to some understanding of moving football pitches forward in Exmouth. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Dent, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as far as I'm being parochial again, as far as Budley is concerned, we do have a football pitch in the club, and they want to actually extend what they're doing. And there are football pitches both in East Budley and Otterton. My question on the strategy was, I like what I read, but I didn't understand what it meant by having a built sports facilities strategy. Matt, could you explain that, please?
Yes. So Sport England have previously, in the past, they've highlighted the importance of playing pitches and the strategy attached to those. This, I suppose, is relatively new feedback from Sport England to us, although no doubt they've required such a strategy or thought such strategies for many years. What they're essentially looking at is a strategy which is about, as I understand it, built facilities, so sports centres, indoor spaces, potentially tennis courts, maybe netball courts as examples, which I guess can be either outdoors or indoors. So it's really a strategy about the quantity, the quality, the availability of sporting space other than sports pitches. and looking forward how we might seek to address extra provision, protect the provision we've got, enhance the provision we've got. So I think in a nutshell, that is the, by summary, way of summary, where Sport England are coming from. But it is very early days from my perspective, trying to look at this and trying to understand it.
Thank you. Matt, so is the idea that this policy, reading through the reports, obviously going to stay under as a planning thing, and I presume go through the strategic planning committee in due course when it gets that far? And I think is the plan to then have the leisure strategy effectively running in parallel alongside and obviously interacting where appropriate?
Yeah, I assume the leisure strategy would be a higher level piece of work, and the playing pitch strategy, certainly in terms of the work I'm doing, would sit below that, and it would get into probably a lot more detail about provision, about needs, about demands. I would assume the same would have to happen with a built sports facility strategy. So that would be the sort of relationship between them. I mean, it's one of the things to stress about the Sport England derived strategies, that they are very much about the totality of facilities and provision, not just what East Devon District Council will provide. So in the ideal world, we would work with a whole range of partners, and we would try and understand who's providing pitches or who's providing sports facilities and why, and what they're providing and what the community demand is across the board, not just the role of East Devon District Council.
Thank you. Rachel, I can see your hand just popped in there. Did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It might just help to clarify a bit. So Sport England's been supporting local authorities to produce playing pitch strategies and built facility strategies for some years now. They're very important elements for the evidence base to a local plan. Basically, in very simple terms, they involve counting what you've got, telling you what quality it is, who's using it, where it is, what the accessibility is in terms of the community, and whether there's any gaps in provision. I think through the work that we're doing at the moment on the diagnostic, and then as that moves into your leisure strategy, there is likely to be the opportunity to wrap some of that up within the leisure strategy, but there is a difference. I agree with Matt completely that a leisure strategy is more a high level piece of work, whereas a built facility strategy and a playing pitch strategy is more about an audit to create a database, if you like, and an evidence of need. And I think one of the things that I think might come out of the initial work that we're doing and links to both of these is potentially how Section 106 is used in the future. I think you mentioned earlier, Matt, about, some problems with or challenges with funding. I understand from the consultation that I've done already that a lot of your Section 106 is focused on play space, children's play space, as opposed to built facilities, but that is obviously an option and a potential source of collecting funding moving forward. Lots of other local authorities have used it to help fund playing pitch development or built facilities. So we will definitely be looking at that, Matt, as part of our work.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor Young, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think Matt edged on it just now, but how much of delivering these facilities is would we need to have from the town and parish councils, and more importantly, the sports clubs? Now, it seems to be that we need to put in a lot of effort ourselves, but we also need a lot of effort from the sports clubs and facilities. Now, for instance, in my neck of the woods, most of the provision for sport is provided by the parish council. And also we've got the rugby fields that are provided by the Chiefs.
Yeah, I think in summary, from a planning perspective, delivery is easiest almost where you're doing a lot of development. So Cranbrook as an example, although there's all sorts of challenges at Cranbrook, where you've got a lot of development happening, you can justify and seek and you can secure quite a lot of sports pitch provision. So that's from a planning perspective. In areas where there's limited development, there's limited abilities for the planning process to actually provide that much in way of sports facilities, because we're just not generating the funds, the monies, the opportunities that arise. So then you get to the sort of wider, I suppose, council delivery patterns and practices, and colleagues here will know far more about where monies might exist. I'm sure very limited monies, but where monies might exist or opportunities to deliver. But then I think you then go into the what can the community do and what are the sports clubs doing and what are the governing bodies of sports doing. And I'm sure there's an awful lot of potential there that we should seek to encourage and support. And they will have lots of demands on their funds, and I'm sure some limitations on funds undoubtedly, but it does mean that there ought to be, and there does need to be, a lot of community input and involvement as well.
Thanks. Councillor Hookway, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to go back to Councillor Gazzard's comments about Warren View, I'd just like to inform the group that the forum that Warren View has a new tenant, and a tenant who has some very clear ideas of how to develop the site for the future, and details will be released as soon as lease details have been concluded, or lease discussions have been concluded. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that update. Councillor Johns, please.
Thank you. If I could declare a pecuniary interest at this precise moment, because my husband is chair and trustee of Ottery St Mary Cricket Club, which may at some point or other come up. I just thought I'd better put that out there just to be on the safe side. I'm quite interested to hear all of this about the playing pitch strategy, etc. Because in Ottery we have a football club. It's run by the local football club. It's not run by LED at all. We also have a very thriving cricket club, which again is run by the community, the cricket club themselves. Actually getting access to Section 106 money for an ongoing sports facility is actually quite hard. There are lots of loopholes you have to go through to actually get the money in the first place. Nothing to do with the people applying for it, nothing to do with the people that work at Section 106, because they do a fantastic job. But the way that it's done by developers, etc., they can literally state who can use what, etc., etc. So I would be very interested to find how LED in this playing pitch strategy are going to be able to get possibly some Section 106 money if the community groups that are already up and running are struggling to get it. Hence my declaration of interest just now, because I didn't realise Cricket Club was going to come up. So yeah, I mean, and again, I do think that when we're looking at things like this, as other councillors have said previously, you need to look at the community groups that are already running and discuss with them exactly what they're doing, because an awful lot of towns and villages have huge community groups running very, very well run football, rugby, cricket, hockey, etc., that get no help whatsoever. So I would be very interested to learn exactly how you're going to get in touch with all those groups and see how that ties in with this playing pitch strategy that we're looking into. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Did you want to comment on any of that? Or?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the playing pitch strategy, we've done a lot of background data collecting. So we've got an awful lot of information on clubs, the pitches they're playing at, the sports site. One of the next stages of work is to actually try and reach out to clubs. Now, the approach I think that Sport England advocate, and I think is typically followed, is to go through the sports governing bodies. But whether we go through that route or try and contact sports clubs directly, there is that engagement with sports clubs to verify the accuracy of our information, for them to set out their aspirations and expectations, and really just to get a kind of a complete picture of what's happening out there, where there's extra demand that's not being met, and what possible opportunities might be identified to try and meet that demand.
Yes, thank you.
If it's right with you, Chair, if I go back very briefly, personally, as I said, I have declared an interest. I think you're better off going directly to the clubs, just for the simple fact that if you go directly to the clubs, you are actually going to hear from the people that are running the facilities exactly what facilities they need help with, etc., regardless of where it is in East Devon. But that's just my personal opinion. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you. Matt, obviously I'm aware that this sits under strategic planning, so we wouldn't be looking to make any explicit recommendations on it itself, but are you looking for any steer from the forum? Are you just happy to note our discussions and to move on?
I'm very happy to note your discussions. If there is a steer, if there is a particular take on matters, I mean, it'd be useful to come out in due course. I wonder, though, whether it comes through the leisure strategy work as a better kind of mechanism to give a steer.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. And I'm pausing slightly just in case a hand shoots up to tell me I'm talking nonsense, but as I can't see any, I will happily then say that the forum will sort of note that, and obviously our discussion points will be made in the minutes. And I'll move on to agenda item 9, which is the exclusion of press and public, and that under section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, the public, including the press, be excluded from the meeting as exempt information of the description set out in the agenda is likely to be disclosed. And on balance, the public interest is in discussing the item in private session, part B. Members, Debbie will now run a vote to confirm your agreement to move to a private session.
Okay, so members of the forum, if you could please use your green ticks. If you're happy to move to a private forum, please. Okay, Chair, I've got that agreement with that of 6 in agreement, none against, none abstaining. So, Chair, if you bear with me, I'll just let you know when I've confirmed that we've stopped going live.